Thanks for joining. We will be getting started in just a second to let some stragglers log in, so sit tight. Thanks for joining. My name is Cassie Rowe, Content Marketing Specialist at 451 Research. Today's webinar, Global Unified Commerce Forecast, Top Trends Reshaping Retail, will be presented by Sheryl Kingstone and Jordan McKee, Research Vice President and Research Director respectively here at 451 Research. Before we dive into the content, I just want to give a brief introduction to 451 Research for those of you who aren't familiar with us. We are a top-tier research and advisory firm headquartered in New York City. Our team of more than 100 analysts cover more than 2,000 technology vendors and service providers every year. 451 Research provides unique insight into emerging disruptive technologies and companies taking them to market, and deliver that insight via syndicated research, advisory services, and live events around the world. Before I turn it over to today's presenters, just a few housekeeping items. The webinar slides can be downloaded in the Attachments and Links section of the BrightTalk platform. You can also submit questions to the presenters in the same platform for the Q&A at the end of this webinar, and the recording will be available immediately after today's session. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Sheryl to start us off. Sheryl?
Thank you, and welcome to today's session. And what you'll be hearing is both from Jordan McKee, Research Director of Customer Experience and Commerce with a specific focus on mobile payments, and myself, who's the Research Vice President for the channel, Customer Experience and Commerce. And we're going to be going over a variety of new data that we have disclosed and a new product that we're bringing to market. And what you're going to really hear from today has to do with a lot of what's going on in the industry with respect to digital shopper insights. And that isn't necessarily just about online. It is about the infusion of digital and physical channels. And so then we're going to move into what's going on with the new product that we're bringing out, which is the Global Unified Commerce Forecast. And all the data that supplies that can be then summed up with some key stats that we're going to go over, which is really about potentially opportunity cost, opportunity lost. And you've got to hang in to the end because we really do have some market-leading figures that you're going to want to leverage within your own organization to understand how you can go to market and change the way you're doing business with your customers. And so before we get into that, what I'm going to do is just start reviewing some of these digital shopper insights. And this has to do with what's going on in the digital world, what's going on in the physical world, in store. And as everyone knows, the store is becoming a digital environment today. And so what are we doing to understand and how are we going to meet that ideal customer experience with the fact that the digital and physical is being converged in the future? And so I really want to take a step back and I want to take a look at what is the ideal customer experience. And I've said this over and over and over again over the years. Experience, not price and products, will be the battleground for the future. And so understanding those consumers' ideal experiences as well as identifying which of those specific experiences will move that needle in terms of loyalty, repeat visits, and in the end, we're going to talk about revenue achieved or revenue lost. And so the fact that these digital and physical worlds are colliding is really felt most acutely in retail. And so it's really impossible to plan for all those potential customer journeys because each is essentially this nonlinear, self-directed interaction. We talk about these micro moments across a customer's channel of choice. And looking at the data here, it really is all about understanding not just about prices, but loyalty and how we're going to be rewarded for that loyalty. Understanding not just the cross-channel experience, but making it efficient, making sure that we're not wasting our end customers' time, or the fact that we have these customer friction points all over the place really has to be resolved. We want to make sure that we're making everything simple and easy to use, whether that be the web interface to finding products and placing orders or checking status, or then how that parlays across consistency, whether that be in the store or whether that be online. And then I want to point out that the mobile is still something that needs to be addressed. Even though it does come down to the bottom of this list, as you see some of the data that comes out, it really is understanding what the future consumer is going to be all about, and that has to do with the digital dignity. So at 451, we take a look at things around understanding context, convenience, and control. And why this is really important is if you take a look at what we see as some consumer data around leading digital dignitaries, they are really demanding this digital and physical convergence. And so when you take a look at things that require retailers to reevaluate how they serve their customers across that shopping journey, it is about that cross-channel experience. They want to focus on giving them improved experiences. And so when we take a look at some key stats of our digital dignitaries, they do a lot of the research, as we all know, and they don't really want to speak to an associate. They want to self-serve. But then they actually do go into the store. And when they go into the store, they want those stores to be more digitally relevant to you. And so that is really where we have to take a look at these digital dignitaries and how they can really be served. And let me take a step back on how to define that. So when we take a look at a digital dignitary, we're looking at ones that have to really love to use technology. They use like 10 apps more on their phone daily. They're early adopters of technology, and they're really making purchases in new channels of engagement such as social commerce, and they're demanding more of these digital dignitaries to have in-store technology purposes. Some people seem to be having some audio chop issues, so I'm not sure if that's really playing out. So someone from our team will probably be reaching out to you. But as we move forward, retailers really need to understand what this means for digital dignitaries, and what's most important is to understand that they are brand advocates. So as compared to what we call these digitally delayed, who are really much more price sensitive. So we have to understand what we can do with these physical storefronts that can be leveraged as an asset, not necessarily a burden, and as you're seeing across the news coming out today, to drive that customer engagement. And to do that, we really have to infuse the store with digital technologies that augment that shopping experience. And so when we take a look at other data, the secret is really how are you going to get them to increase their spend? And so the data that we have is 72% would shop at a specific location if the experience was hassle-free or quick. And we're actually going to tell you later in the deck the absolute impact that that's going to have on your bottom line by understanding the potential loss by not having that convenient experience. 63% want to increase their spend if they got a more personalized customer experience, and 61% would share personalized information if that retailer or brand offered better rewards. If you look at that customer experience that I mentioned earlier, it really was all about those loyalty and rewards. And so with the explosion of these new types of physical and digital and blended experience, the battleground is really moving very quickly beyond what we talked about previously as omnichannel to more of this unified commerce experience where it can be much more intelligent and pervasive and all personalized to that consumer's changing context. And that is why we talk about context, convenience, and control as it relates to things like personalized coupons and recommendations, or convenience as it relates to no lines, or control as it relates to out of stock, which completely correlates to what we're talking about with this cross-channel experience. So the digital dignitaries is a consumer group that really is that high-value segment of shoppers, and we anticipate that it will expand. And so that's really how you can increase spending, and you really want to court them. And the ability to court them is about understanding how to encompass that broader value proposition across the entire customer journey. And they want less hassle-free experiences, and they want to make sure that they're using things like mobile apps, and you're augmenting that experience for new checkout experiences in store. And even in today's world, because I do want to address the last point, around 61% would share personal information with retailers and brands, that's something to really wake up and pay attention to. How are we doing that without avoiding trust? And so they will share, but who will share? What's the segment of share? How are we going to leverage that? Because another data point we do have is that even in today's world, 27% of consumers stated that they are less trusting now than they were a year ago. So how are we going to make sure that we're giving them what they want in a very safe environment and in a trusting way? And why is this so important to pay attention to? Well, when we take a look at other data that we have in the organization, we also have retailer investment in digital transformation strategies. And so almost two-thirds of retailers are really lagging behind. And how we get that is we talk about digital leaders. Those are ones that actually have a formal strategy and are actively digitizing those processes. And this is retail-specific industry. And the digital laggards are everybody else, the ones that are only in their planning stages, or they're considering it, or they have absolutely no digital transformation strategy at all. And those are the ones that are resisting change. And we have to understand why this is so important, because we talk about these smartphone-wielding, digitally empowered consumers that are really demanding these new forms of engagement. And so that's really what's going to change the way we interact. And so retailers have to embrace new digital technologies so that you can improve with data and insights. You can connect with your consumers with the right information at the right time, and that ultimately leads to a better customer experience. And savvy retailers understand that digital innovation leads to that transformational experience, and it's very strategic, and it can lead to a competitive differentiation. And so when we take a look at what retailers are doing, though, and understandably with everything that's going on with margins being eroded and everyone focused on operational efficiencies, the data does point that out. So top of the charts is to improve operational efficiencies. Improving the customer experience is far behind, but if we can't reduce those customer friction points, if we can't understand how to reduce OpEx, then we're really not going to be able to spend on improving customer experiences. So over the years, retailers have attempted to reduce OpEx and improve CX through a variety of technology investments, but what's hamstringing a lot of these operational issues that are increasing total cost of ownership has to do with things like legacy and compartmental software. Some of their point of sale is very outdated. Order management systems are all legacy, and these remain barriers that keep that customer data and that interaction siloed, which reduces the effectiveness of a lot of these new approaches that we want to implement. And so if we can't understand how to eliminate a lot of that legacy environment, we won't necessarily improve operational efficiencies, and in the end, we won't necessarily be able to improve customer experience or our ability to innovate, which won't lead to an increased competitive differentiation, and I can continue to go on and on and on. But what is interesting and what's great is that when we take a look at interesting use cases about understanding how to focus on not only reducing operational efficiencies but improving customer experience and the ability to innovate, when we asked retailers what they were looking to really invest in, the interesting part is if you looked at the digital leaders, now those were the 33% that actually had formal digital transformation processes. That's where you start seeing a huge difference. And so digital leaders are capitalizing on data and connected experience so that they can reimagine the future. And so there is a variety of factors that are ranging here that we can leverage. But looking at the data, 89% are interested in using transactional data correlated with that customer profile data so that the accuracy of that offer and that promotion is more interesting for that consumer. 86% are interested in using machine learning to create personalized customer experiences, and then 77% are interested in location data. We have a lot of ways and data that really comes out of how to leverage that location data so that you are ensuring you have contextually relevant communications. And the way you get at a lot of these, all three of these types of bullet points and data points, is a constant stream of digital exhaust. Things like connected TVs and the abundance of these smartphones are really pretty much where you're going to start leveraging a lot of this, a lot of the first-party, third-party data and second-party data, a lot of the streaming data that you're going to get from these mobile devices, along with a lot of the behavioral data that you'll get online. This is where you're going to start truly having that precision link between what you're trying to market and what's going to improve customer engagement. So that's really where we have to understand how retailers really need to capture and analyze new forms of data and how that's going to play a powerful role in improving digital innovation in their organization. And before we really understand and move beyond that, what I really want to take a look at is where are we going with all this data, and how does it really impact how retailers can take this digital shift forward? And that was one of the reasons why we developed a new product called this Unified Commerce Forecast, and it's global. And at this point, what I am going to do is turn it over to Jordan McKee to go over in detail what this new product forecast is, how the data that we have around digital shoppers can play out with this unified forecast, and other ways to use this forecast for your own needs.
Alrighty, thank you, Sheryl, for that introduction. I think you brought up an important point. One of the observations that we've made over the past few years when we look through some of our consumer survey data is that there are dramatic shifts that are occurring in terms of purchase channel preference, in terms of desired ways to interact with a business. And those shifts that we've slowly uncovered over the course of the past almost a decade now have led us to the creation of this product, which is our Global Unified Commerce Forecast. Effectively, what we've done over the course of the past 18 or so months is went out into the market, had conversations with financial institutions, with payment networks, with digital wallet providers, large retailers, a whole host of different stakeholders across the commerce value chain to gather market data from them. Some of that data publicly available, some of that data provided to us confidentially that we bake into this forecast to give us a really granular view, straight from the horse's mouth, as to how purchase activity is playing out, not only across purchase channels, but across the globe. And so effectively what this product is a forecast that sizes up both transaction volume and dollar value of sales across 63 countries, drilling down into mobile commerce, into e-commerce, into mobile contactless payments, and traditional in-store payments. And this forecast has been delivered as of this week. It's live, it's available for clients, and it's delivered in an Excel-based file. It's built with pivot tables, allowing you to slice and dice the data to your pleasing, to drill into specific countries, to specific purchase channels, looking out over 5 years to see how those dollar volumes are changing. And you can put this information, of course, in local currency, depending on the market need that you have. But when we take a step back and look at this forecast, there's a couple of really powerful takeaways, that we've sort of observed sifting through the data, and that's what I'm excited to share with you today. And I think it helps to really quantify some of these insights that Sheryl's shared with us around how shoppers are changing, where their needs are shifting, and how they're increasingly looking to interact with businesses. And so the first observation that we've made, and probably the most powerful, is that digital share of commerce is increasing fairly rapidly. So as businesses, we've of course been looking at e-commerce for a couple decades now, and there's been a lot of attention, there's been a lot of blood, sweat, and tears poured into making e-commerce a successful sales channel. But up until somewhat recently, e-commerce has really only been a drop in the ocean in terms of actual sales volume when you compare it to overall sales volume that we're seeing in store. This year, we expect to see a really powerful inflection point occur where 1 out of every $10 spent globally will be in the digital channel, either online or mobile. Right? 1 out of every $10 will now occur in a digital channel, and that's only going to continue to grow throughout the throughout the 5 years that this forecast runs. So if we look out to 2022, very quickly we're nearing 1 out of every $5 spent in digital channels. And when we think about the drivers at play here, that we've kind of baked into these projections, there's a number of them that are worth mentioning. I think one is certainly the proliferation of large marketplaces around the globe, certainly the likes of Amazon and JD.com and Alibaba, where we continue to find ourselves spending more and more of our money, perhaps not at a physical brick and mortar retailer, but with a marketplace like Amazon, where we can now subscribe and save to products like razors and dog food, products that we traditionally would have purchased in store. Of course, there's the on-demand economy, right? I mean, think about an experience like Lyft or Uber. 10 years ago, those would have been card swipes in the back of a taxi. Those would have been physical world transactions. Now they're occurring inside native mobile applications. The subscription economy is absolutely real. So many different types of products and services are now available on a subscription basis. The Dollar Shave Club, a great example of that, right, where you can subscribe to razors and have those razors, those shaving razors, delivered to you at specific intervals, specifically when you need them. Omnichannel experiences, think about things like mobile order ahead and click and collect, where perhaps, again, 10 years ago, you might have made that purchase in store for that cup of coffee. Well, now you can pull open that Starbucks app, you can prepay for that order, purchase it inside a native mobile application, a digital commerce transaction, and then pick that product up in the physical world at the actual storefront. And increasingly, I think what you're really going to start to see driving a lot of this growth is the Internet of Things. We think about connected cars, think about wearables, think about various types of smart home devices. Those are now endpoints for commerce, right? They're effectively an expansion of the acceptance network. And what we hypothesize is these new types of devices that are in the world around us, really creating this mesh around us as consumers, are going to be the touch points that we're going to turn to increasingly so to make purchases. So the combination of all these drivers are baked into these projections, and we feel are really going to dramatically shift purchase volume over the course of the next few years. In terms of the specific volume of sales that we're projecting, we anticipate that will move from about $2.8 trillion spent globally in digital commerce sales channels this year to $5.8 trillion, almost $6 trillion in digital sales, mobile and e-commerce sales by 2022. That's around the globe. The CAGR for that growth through the forecast period is just over 20%, so that's about 6x the rate of in-store growth. And so that's a pretty compelling figure right there. 6x the rate of in-store growth when you think about digital commerce. And when we drill into some of these large global figures, there's a couple of interesting things that come out. I'd say the first is around the sheer size of China. Right? China this year is going to be the world's first $1 trillion digital commerce market. Right? When we move out to 2022 and look at APAC as a region, APAC is going to be 22.8% larger than all other regions in the world combined from a digital commerce sales activity standpoint. Right? So fairly compelling data when you think about the size of APAC versus the rest of the world. Once we get to 2022, APAC won't be alone as the only $1 trillion market. North America and Western Europe are going to meet APAC in 2022 as the other $2 trillion markets that businesses can tap into. And the final observation that I would point to here is the growth that we're seeing in emerging markets. When we think about a lot of the growth that's kind of manifesting in this forecast, much of it is coming from emerging markets. So while the overall global CAGR for digital commerce sales through 2022 is about 20%, when you look specifically at APAC, it's 23%, right? LATAM isn't far behind, and Middle East and Africa is not far behind LATAM. And so there's a confluence of factors that are fueling digital commerce growth in these emerging markets. It's a rising middle class. It's increasing smartphone penetration. There's a variety of things that you can point to. But when you think about digital commerce, it is not just an opportunity that's indexed to developed markets. Increasingly, it's going to be emerging markets that are driving a lot of growth and they're driving a lot of activity when you think about sales volume. Another interesting thing to call out when you think about the growth of digital commerce is that digital commerce is actually composed of two somewhat distinct purchase experiences. One is e-commerce, where more often than not, you're going to be initiating a purchase through a web browser on either a desktop computer or a laptop computer. And the other is m-commerce, mobile commerce, where you're going to be initiating a purchase on a native mobile application like Target's app or like Uber, or the other option is, of course, within a mobile web browser. If you're going to Target's mobile website, that's considered a mobile commerce purchase. What's to make note here is the rate of m-commerce growth versus e-commerce growth. When we look out to 2022, we expect m-commerce will grow at about a 24.5% CAGR. Contrast that with e-commerce growth, which is a fair amount lower, just about 17% CAGR through 2022. What's important to note, even though we look out to 2022 here, and we're looking at a sales volume picture, mobile in 2022 is going to account for 48% of digital commerce. So in 2022, mobile is very close to surpassing e-commerce from a dollar value standpoint. But the other way to look at this is from a transaction volume standpoint, the actual count of transactions. And when you think about this dichotomy between m-commerce and e-commerce from a transaction volume standpoint, mobile commerce will actually surpass e-commerce next year in 2019. And when you look out to 2022, mobile commerce will actually make up 55% of all digital commerce transactions. And so you might be asking, well, how is there this disparity between sales and between transaction volume? And the reason is pretty simple. What we've found through talking with payment networks, payment processors, digital wallet providers, is that the average ticket size for a mobile commerce transaction is actually a fair amount smaller than an e-commerce transaction. It's about 26% smaller. So what we've pegged the average global ticket size for mobile commerce is at about just shy of $53. For e-commerce, it's almost $67. And the reason for that smaller ticket size is, think about the types of transactions that you're often making on your mobile device. A ride share, right, where you're using Uber and perhaps you're paying $10 or $15 to go across town. Ordering ahead for food, where perhaps you're paying $30 or $40 for a food order for yourself and your wife, right? Smaller ticket sizes characterize mobile, and that's why, despite the fact that e-commerce will remain larger from a sales standpoint through 2022, m-commerce will actually surpass e-commerce from a transaction volume standpoint next year. And so the point to take away here is that increasingly so, consumers are going to be interacting with you via mobile devices, but not just interacting. More often than not, it's probably going to be the only touch point they have with you. So when you think about developing purchase experiences, when you think about developing experiences that move from product impression through to the shopping cart through to purchase, think about that experience and how it's going to be consumed on a small screen, a screen that is significantly smaller than what might appear on a laptop or a desktop. Moving forward, I also want to talk about mobile contactless payments. Much of what I've shared to date has been indexed to digital commerce, purchases, in card-not-present environments, either through a browser or through a mobile application. Mobile contactless payments are transactions initiated at the point of sale by tapping your device on the terminal using a digital wallet like Apple Pay or Google Pay. And we have some interesting market data to share around the growth of mobile contactless payments through 2022. We expect them to reach about $359 billion this year globally and crest $1 trillion by 2022. Mobile contactless payments actually show the largest, the fastest growing CAGR of all the different sales channels, growing at almost a 31% CAGR through 2022. But when you take a step back and look at mobile contactless payments against actual brick and mortar sales volume, this year they'll only account for 1.4% of global brick and mortar retail sales. So that's about 1 out of every 100 sales, 1 out of every $100 spent at the point of sale will be through a mobile device using something like Apple Pay or Google Pay. By 2022, it'll be almost 4%. So the point I'm trying to make here is, while we will continue to see some fairly aggressive growth for mobile contactless payments, still they remain very small in proportion to overall retail sales in store. And I think, in some ways that's a disappointing figure for those that have been invested in the digital payment space, focused specifically on the point of sale over the past few years. The problem that we still continue to see, and we've been speaking about this for many, many years now, is the lack of a compelling value proposition to use mobile payments in store, right? It has to be about a value prop that's bigger than payments. It has to be about more than just paying. And still what we've seen to date is only small advances on that front, where the value prop still remains very centered around the transaction and fails to pull in many of the things that Sheryl had alluded to around engagement, around loyalty, around rewards. That's sort of the next chasm to cross for the ecosystem, and we don't anticipate that'll happen in a meaningful way for some time. While this particular chart that you're seeing here isn't specific to our forecast, it actually comes from our Voice of the Connected User Landscape survey. I wanted to share it because it has some fascinating data that ties into the chart you saw previously around mobile contactless payments. We're looking specifically at monthly active digital wallet users, and then of that base of active users, the specific digital wallets that they're using. What's been important to note about the digital wallet space over the past few years is that just about every provider in the market has broadened beyond the point of sale to allow for transactions to be initiated via that wallet online and via mobile applications. And what we think will happen as you start to look out over the next few years is that mobile wallets will still struggle in store, but they'll grow incredibly fast in digital commerce sales channels. Reason being that there's still so much friction today when it comes to the checkout experience online, and we'll get into this momentarily. And we think digital wallets have a really solid value prop where you think about using, again, Apple Pay in a native mobile application. You either look at your device if you have an iPhone 10, or you use your fingerprint if you have a model that comes before that, and the transaction is done, right? You don't populate your payment credentials, you don't populate shipping information. It's a seamless experience. We think digital wallets will become an incredibly valuable conversion tool moving forward for businesses. And we think a lot of the digital wallet activity, again, is not going to happen at the point of sale. It's going to happen on e-commerce browsers and within mobile applications. So that's something to make note of, especially if you're a merchant that's looking to improve the checkout experience. So as we move into the last part of this webinar, what we'll be speaking about is opportunity costs. As more transaction volume flows into digital commerce sales channels, there's a variety of considerations, there's a variety of implications for stakeholders across the value chain, right? And we're going to bring to the surface some of these and discuss some market data that we've collected that really underscores the criticality of paying close attention to addressing some of these pain points that still exist. The first is around false positives. So the interesting thing to note about false positives is effectively when a consumer tries to make a purchase online and for whatever reason that transaction is declined despite having sufficient funds, that consumer, one, is not able to make the purchase, and two, has some fairly negative behavior that's going to occur after the experience. So what we found is 1 in 10 shoppers have had their card declined at a retailer in the past 12 months despite having sufficient funds, and of those, 1 in 3 that had that experience say they're unlikely to return to that retailer again. So that's pretty concerning if you're a retailer. And if, this is U.S. data, by the way. If you look at Europe, it's actually a bit higher. 1 in 5 consumers in Europe have experienced effectively what we would call a false positive, and 2 in 5 that had that experience are unlikely to return. So what we're bringing forth here is that false positives are one of the biggest problems to solve in digital commerce. Again, businesses are turning away legitimate customers and legitimate sales dollars because of the fact that they think there's fraud or their payment partner thinks there's fraud associated with the transaction. And this is becoming increasingly challenging because of the amount of fraud that's pouring into the digital commerce space. A survey we conducted earlier this year showed that 3 in 5 merchants in the U.S. cited a rise in fraudulent activity in their digital commerce sales channels year over year. This is being fueled by a whole host of forces, right? Fraudsters following the volume, EMV in the U.S. squeezing the fraud bubble, the amount of PII that's sitting in the hands of organized crime rings. There's a whole host of drivers behind the increase in fraud in digital channels. But the challenge, again, isn't just keeping the bad guys out. It's keeping the bad guys out while still letting the good customers in. And that's sort of where the rub lies. That's sort of where this false positive problem exists today. What I would call out are a couple advances that we've seen on this front. If you look at solutions like Adyen's Revenue Protect, if you look at WorldPay's AuthMax, they're designed to boost approval rates. They incorporate things that Sheryl was speaking about, things like machine learning, to construct the optimal authorization message to put forth to the issuer to increase the prospects of that transaction being approved. So again, false positives are one of the large opportunity costs that we've identified as more transactions move into digital channels and as more fraud consequentially follows. I'd also like to point out some of the challenges that we've seen around the lack of payment methods that are being presented to customers in digital commerce sales channels. So what we found in a recent survey is about 1 out of every 5 shoppers have encountered a merchant in the past year that didn't accept their preferred method of payment. And of those that had that experience, there were some fairly negative things that happened to the business. Of those, 30% spent less, about a quarter made the purchase elsewhere, and 7% didn't make the purchase at all. And the thing to make note of when you think about just commerce in general, right, and the role of payments in commerce, customers expect to be able to pay they want to pay. It's their hard-earned money that they're handing over, and I don't think it's an unreasonable ask for them to be able to transmit that via the method that is most convenient and comfortable with them. The challenge, though, is, especially when you think about digital commerce, there are so many different types of payment methods that customers want to use. And as you start selling cross-border, the number of payment methods expands even far beyond just digital wallets and Visa and MasterCard and Discover and Amex. It's local payment methods like SoFort, it's GiroPay, it's Ideal, all these payment methods in Europe. There are many more in other markets around the world. And the challenge is not just integrating all those different methods, but presenting them in a way that doesn't make the checkout page look like a NASCAR fender. It's a real problem today where merchants have so many different types of payment methods littered across the checkout page. It creates an ugly purchase experience. We've talked to retailers that have actually seen that drive up cart abandonment. So there's a real need to optimize and personalize the checkout experience with the payment methods that are specifically tailored to your audience. And I want to call out an announcement that PayPal made yesterday that I think is a really nice advancement on this front. They introduced something on a global scale called Smart Payment Buttons, which effectively lets merchants in different countries customize the payment options and create different types of checkout experiences based on the user's location, based on their IP address that's being presented, based on their role or their activation of certain payment methods like Venmo, to customize that checkout experience specifically with the payment methods that are catered to that individual user. I think that is something that we will see more of in the future from other providers. But when you think about payment methods and you think about the number that are out there, think about the ways that you can create a very personalized and very tailored checkout experience so you're providing customers the way they want to pay without bombarding them with too many options that turns them away. Why is that important? Well, when we use some data that we've pulled from our unified commerce forecast and pair it with some of the survey data that we've collected, we found over $1 billion just in the U.S. in potential sales have been lost 1 year's time as a result of retailers not offering customers preferred payment methods. So payments are much more than a cost of doing business. They're a customer experience factor, and they're something that merchants and their partners need to focus on to ensure that they're not turning away valid sales, to ensure that they're not turning away customers in the future. So with that, I've spoken a lot about the opportunity costs and the opportunity loss associated with payments. At this point, I'd like to turn it back to Sheryl to talk more broadly about some of the challenges that are still confronting merchants from a checkout and purchase experience standpoint. Sheryl?
Thank you. And building on top of this $1.1 billion potential loss here with respect to personalization and the whole shopping cart area is this next discussion. And so when we do take a look and we look at it across, yes, the physical store, but we also want to take a look at what's going on with the online shopping experience. And so when we talked about earlier the digital dignitaries and how they were really using more digital technologies in store, we also take a look at what they were doing online. And so in the last 6 months, we've asked these consumers how many times that they abandoned an online shopping cart because of difficulties completing a purchase. And that had to do a lot with personalization. It can be payment card acceptance. It can be a variety of ways. And so what's really interesting is what's going on with this friction point. And I get a lot of inquiries from retailers themselves. What can we do to fix this abandoned shopping cart? And there's a lot of ways to fix it, but we have to look at friction. Because if we look at the data here, at least 17% was one. Then you've got abandoned twice, 15%, 3 times 8%, 4 to 6, more than 6 times. So what's going on with these friction points? And then we ask them, is it about, did they go somewhere else to spend? Did they spend less? Where did they make this purchase? Very similar to the way Jordan was looking at it. And so it really is all about how to personalize that online experience to avoid that delay in that shopping cart purchase. And it could be from a difficult experience. It could be from the fact that they just changed their mind. But we specifically are looking at the missed opportunity here. So failing to weave in context of previous interactions into that shopping journey can really result in frustrating the customer experience. But what we're pointing out here is the fact that you can now quantify that missed opportunity, understand where missed revenue opportunities were going, and then it really is, what are you going to do about it? And so we are beginning to see early evidence of vendors and retailers rising to the occasion to understand how to capitalize on this opportunity. Because if we all talk about what I saw earlier around the experience, all of a sudden it's those micro moments, you're in the moment right there, and all of a sudden you're frustrating them. Well, what does that mean to the overall customer experience and the dollar value? What is that top-line figure that we're trying to promote here? Well, did you know that $34.4 billion in losses in the U.S. alone last year was from cart abandonment? And it's primarily because of difficulties. So, yes, we can personalize the experience, but we really have to understand what those friction points are and why they're abandoning. And this is where we need to understand and measure the overall experience across the different journey. And technology is quickly becoming the catalyst for one of those most profound changes to occur between the relationship between our shoppers and our retailers, and that's what we're here to discuss. And that's really what the bottom line is. And retail, in turn, is being really redefined from a transactional relationship between a lot of that, the people and the company itself, into a more nuanced tangle relationship between the shoppers that you have and those automated systems and the devices that they're using to obtain these products and services. And with this dramatic shift in power between retailers and customers, I go back to what I said in the opening of this session, which was price and products are no longer enough to influence decisions. Instead, people are placing higher value on those experiences. And if you have to take anything away from that, it is all about a unified commerce experience that is more personalized in context to what consumers want. And over the next 3 to 5 years, we'll be dominated by demand for these more intelligent content that is more personalized and delivered in this digital world. We're going to have to open up new channels of engagement in social networks. We're going to have to really embrace these connected devices, whether those be in the physical locations or whether it still be in the digital location. And the explosion of this connectivities and these intelligent devices is what's really changing the game for the future customer experience. Because yesterday's world was all about this one-way interaction, and the future is around two-way, real-time engagement anywhere and on any device. And so at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to open it up for questions. I know we did have some already in there. So Cassie, how would you like us to move forward with some of the questions that we have from the data that we presented along with the forecast that we have?
Absolutely. So just a reminder, everyone, if you're wondering where you can submit questions, it should be right in your BrightTalk platform. And also, if you have a minute, feel free to also leave us feedback at any point. But from there, we're going to start with questions. I have one here, and if it's cool with you guys, I'll just ask you guys questions, and you guys can provide answers, and we'll go from there.
Sure.
Okay. So first question. How is Amazon using this data harvesting, blending, and disruption to augment customer experience and journey with their acquisition of Whole Foods for a staggering $13.7 billion?
Yeah, we've been looking at this, and a lot of people have been looking at this, and the whole Amazon effect, it's the whole digital and physical conversion, and this was one of those key data points that changed the industry. There have been several others that have really happened, and it really isn't only about the data harvesting. And yes, it's the blending of the disruption, but it really is also about the fact that it has a unique hippie, yuppie, type of world, and it really is all about groceries and getting the groceries online at a point of interaction right then and there. So it's leveraging that physical location to deliver that end user experience. And yes, it is about data harvesting, but it was also about a physical location and leveraging that in store so that we can actually deliver that cross-channel experience and delivering in-store foods at point at home. And so everyone's all about the data with Amazon, but we have to not forget that it really is also about that digital and physical conversion that has nothing to do with the data and all about executing on that customer experience and also understanding a target audience of digital, really, dignities and more upper income shoppers that are there.
And Sheryl, just to echo your point there, I think you brought up something really important around this broader trend that we're seeing in retail of companies moving from online to offline. It absolutely underscores the continued relevance of the physical storefront as an important touch point. And Amazon is doing this obviously not only with Whole Foods, but with their Amazon Go experience, which has expanded from Seattle into other markets. And again, it's not just Amazon. I mean, you look at some of the other digital native brands out there like Bonobos or Warby Parker that started off specifically selling online and have now realized that having a physical touch point, having an actual store that's more experiential in nature is something that's really valuable and something that's still relevant today. So while there's all this talk about how the store is dead, it actually isn't, right? There actually still is a role for it to play. It just has to evolve, and I think that's what some of these digital natives are trying to address with their move to the physical world.
And there've been a lot of press out there about the store is dead, long live the store, and some retailers made some massive mistakes and are failing, and it isn't necessarily only from the presence of the digital channel.
Next question. Yeah, next question I have is for you, Sheryl. Earlier you discussed data on the digital shopper. Can you tell me more about the source of that data and where it can find it?
Yeah, I didn't source my data. Okay, so a lot of the stats that you're going to see at the beginning of this is through what we call as the voice of the connected user landscape, and this is actually data that's just being published now. It's coming out through what we call our population representative, and it's around the connected experiences. And so that data is going to be published. We also use that data to do persona analysis, and it's how we came up with the digital dignitary. And all of that is through, again, the voice of the connected user landscape, and that's the most recent data set that we're publishing.
If you guys did want any more information about the voice of the connected user landscape, there is some information at 451research.com. But like Sheryl said, definitely keep an eye out when we have more data for you. Next question I have for you, Sheryl, is how does retail's digital transformation compare to other industries?
Yeah, retail is mixed, right? So when we take a look at where retail are in the leaders versus laggards, they actually are a little bit further behind maybe the financial services organizations, but they're not as far behind as government and some other verticals. But they're really in the top three. So when we take a look at it, other ones that are farther behind would be telcos. But financial services and retailers are really embracing digital transformation. And so we're going to continue to track how they're maturing on this stage and a little bit more granular about what the digital laggards are doing, because what's really changed over the last couple of years is the 5%. We currently have no digital transformation strategy. We're in the last couple of years, sometimes that was 10% or higher. And so what we're seeing is that we're slowly having the retail industry move forward into having the planning stage and then eventually heading down into that formal strategy.
Awesome. Jordan, the next question is for you. How do you build the Global Unified Commerce forecast, and is the forecast currently available today?
Yeah, good question. So I think I touched on this briefly when I began speaking about some of the findings. The big differentiator for this forecast, as I alluded to, is that it's built with market data. It's data that we've collected from actual entities that handle transactions that facilitate commerce across geographies, across sales channels, we went out and collected this data from the stakeholders and embedded it in this forecast. That's the primary source, that's the primary driver of the findings that you see. Other inputs are, what you might expect, census data, World Bank data, publicly available information from a variety of government agencies around the world. We also, as Sheryl has mentioned, have consumer surveys that run on a quarterly basis that have great longitudinal data that have provided us some excellent directional guidance for how we're thinking about the market's growth and trajectory. In terms of its availability, it is available. It launched officially this week. There was a press release, I believe, on Monday or Tuesday of last week, and it's ready for purchase, right? So we're excited to get the data out there, and already have a few clients using it in some interesting ways to identify emerging market opportunities for things like pricing and specific sales channels. There's a lot you can do with it, and we're pretty happy that it's finally baked and ready to be in clients' hands.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad we were able to announce that last week and have it available. I have a question here that I think is in relation to Sheryl, the last one that you answered. The question goes, hence best to consolidate AI, AR, VR, MR, and last mile delivery with prime air drones, etc., to optimize customer journey and experience?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what you're asking, but we do have data on the adoption of AR, VR, and the multi-state reality, mixed reality angle. And so what I don't necessarily have is what's going on with the prime air drones. What we do have is the consumer adoption across all of that, and we also have the willingness of retailers to embrace that. I do have examples of how to optimize that customer journey and how we're using and recommendations for how we can use mixed reality, augmented reality, virtual reality, and AI in the overall retail experience. So please reach out to me on that. And those are all different, right? And it can be used different. So the use cases of that may or may not be related to the prime air drone. So why don't you send me an email and reach out to us? And that's another thing that we didn't do here was share our email addresses, but it's Sheryl, how my name is spelled, .Kingstone at 451research.com, or just reach out to the main area and we'll try to get some of those answered.
You can also feel free to send them a question on Twitter.
Or Twitter at Kingstone. Thank you, Cassie.
I always love to plug the analyst Twitter handles.
Yes, feel free to follow both Jordan and myself on Twitter. We will be releasing more data out of the global unified commerce forecast coming out, along with data that's coming out recently from the Voice of the Connected User Landscape, and then some Vote digital transformation data that we will be having coming out as it relates to more line of business angles. So please stay tuned for all of that, and please follow us on Twitter.
Awesome. So I think I have one more question in our little question from the audience bank here. And it is for Jordan. Jordan, what do you see as the top implications for financial institutions as more commerce activity moves into digital channels?
Yeah, good question. There's two things I would point to. The first are issues around top of wallet. So as many of us know, card issuers today spend quite literally, collectively, hundreds of millions of dollars to influence cardholder spending behaviors, and specifically to be that top card that you pull out of the wallet for each and every transaction. As more commerce moves into digital channels and more merchants adopt card-on-file purchase experiences where you store your card with the merchant to enable a faster checkout, it becomes increasingly difficult to be the de facto payment card as you have your card stored not just with one merchant, but with Amazon, with Netflix, with Spotify, with iTunes, so on and so forth. Payment cards are being distributed all over different types of digital merchants' properties, and for card issuers, they need to invest in ways to drive loyalty and to ensure that they're going to be that de facto card for every digital purchase, which again is going to become increasingly difficult as those cards become distributed across all sorts of different merchants and digital wallets, to be clear. The second thing I would point out is to be careful or to be wary of some of these new entrants into the market that are focused on digital commerce that are providing what I would consider to be credit card substitutes. There's the likes of Klarna, the likes of Afterpay, Splitit, what we tend to call installment buying providers that provide a new way of purchasing and financing a purchase in a digital channel. Those potentially pose a threat to credit card issuers, something to be cognizant of. The final point I guess I'll throw out and sort of alluded to this is of course around fraud. We're seeing an influx of fraud move into digital channels. PII is distributed into all sorts of bad actors' hands. It's something card issuers need to be wary of. When they think about locking down payment data, think about things like tokenization and the role that that's going to play in ensuring that even if transaction data gets into the wrong hands, it won't be for use outside of its intended purpose. So top of wallet, installment buying providers, and increases in fraud, three things that are very important for FIs to pay attention to.
Thanks, Jordan. I don't see any more questions. We do have 4 minutes left, so I'll start wrapping up, and if another question comes in, I'll stop what I'm doing. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This webinar, like I said at the beginning of the presentation, the recording of this presentation will be available at this address, and you can watch it at any time on demand, share it with your friends, share it on Twitter. Also, feel free to follow Sheryl, follow Jordan, and follow 451 Research on Twitter. If you missed what their handles are, Sheryl, it's S. Kingstone?
Yeah, S. Kingstone.
And Jordan, what's yours?
It's Jordan H. McKee.
Yep, feel free to follow them there. If you do have extra questions, you can send them to them on Twitter. Also, I run the 451 Research Twitter, so if you also have questions for them but forget their handles, you can send them to me on Twitter and I will forward it over to them. But with that, please feel free to leave us some feedback from the audience. It helps us improve our webinars for the future and give you a better experience. Any final thoughts, Sheryl and Jordan?
No, just look forward for sharing some more insights, and we are really doubling down on the research that we have as it relates to the shift towards unified commerce.
Thank you. Summed it up nicely, Sheryl. Thanks, everybody, for joining.
Thank you, everyone. See you next time.